If you're tuning in live, thanks for making time for us on your busy day. If you're watching this on YouTube, thanks for stopping by. Whichever way you're watching, welcome to Postmedia's second season of Driving into the Future Roundtables. Today, we're tackling how Canada can become a leader in battery manufacturing, for electric vehicles. I'm David Booth, and I'm the senior writer for Driving.ca. The transition to electrification is picking up speed. Many countries, including Canada, have pledged to ban the sale of internal combustion engines by 2035. Some automakers have stated their intention of stopping development of piston-powered cars as soon as 2028, and a few have even pledged to eliminate gas engines from the lineup even sooner. All in all, it's a massive shift. Now, even if you think those goals are unrealistic and that the 2035 cutoff date is too ambitious, and to be honest, there is good argument for such skepticism, electrification is hugely important to the automotive industry. Whether EVs account for 25% of the market share in 2030 or 50%, the electrification of the passenger vehicle represents a paradigm shift in the production of cars. The important question for Canadians then is, how do we become a part of that revolution? How do our parts industries, one of the biggest employers in Canada, become a part of that supply chain for the manufacture of electric vehicles? How do we entice battery manufacturing plants to our shores? Are our advantages in resources and clean energy enough to attract the huge investments necessary? How do political pressures, like US President Biden's promise of a $12,500 subsidy for EVs built only in America, affect our ability to attract the battery and EV manufacturers to our country? And does our government understand that the time to act is now, and that Canada needs to match the urgency of other countries in showing that we want to be a part of this electrification revolution? Helping us answer these questions are Scott McKenzie, Senior National Manager of External Affairs for Toyota Canada, Daniel Breton, President and CEO of Electric Mobility Canada. Welcome back, Daniel. Joanne Kyriazis, Senior Policy Advisor of Clean Energy Canada, and Flavio Volpe, President of Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association of Canada. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us today. Before we start the proceedings, let me welcome all our viewers and inform them we will have time to answer your questions at the end of this discussion. Okay, guys, what a time to be discussing the future of the automotive parts industry in Canada. Transition to electrification is accelerating, and if Canada is to have any hope in becoming a part of that transition, it is going to have to move with a speed that we haven't seen before. So let's see how we're positioned for this grand adventure and what we can do to move it along. Joanna, I'm going to start with you. What are the advantages Canada has to offer for someone looking to establish a battery manufacturing plant in Canada? Is it simply because we have more plentiful resources and minerals? Is there more than that we can offer? What else might Canada possess that makes it such a great Canada to produce clean energy batteries?
Thanks, David. Canada ranks in the top 5 countries in terms of its battery supply chain potential. You're right that critical minerals are a big piece of this. EVs are more mineral intensive than combustion vehicles are. And so the fact that we have access to a lot of those critical metals and minerals like lithium, cobalt, nickel, and graphite is a big plus. Second, we're next door to one of the largest auto markets in the world, the US. That's a big plus. These strengths combined with our high-skilled workforce, our cutting-edge battery research and innovation ecosystem, and our obviously strong auto sector make us a very good candidate to lead on battery production. And then last, for auto and battery companies like BMW and British Volt, who are looking to reduce the carbon footprint of the products that they're selling, Canada has an abundance of clean electricity to power lower carbon manufacturing operations and help those companies produce clean EVs and batteries.
Oh, I didn't know we were fifth in potential. That's actually very good news. Thanks very much. Daniel, I think some of our viewers might still be a little confused. We in the business, we talk about batteries and battery cells and sometimes don't differentiate enough between the two. So can you give our viewers just a quick rundown of what a battery cell is and what types there are, like cylindrical, pouch-like, and are battery cells easily shipped around the world? And how many cells there are in a typical battery? Just a background of what goes into a battery and what we can build here and what we can't.
Well, first of all, we can build any type of battery that we want, but it depends on what direction battery manufacturing will go towards. So let's take a look at two examples, the BMW i3 and the Tesla Model 3. So if you look at an i3, you have 96 battery cells. These cells are combined into one module, and 8 modules are put together to put it into the vehicle in the form of a battery pack. If you look at a Tesla Model 3, which is a cylindrical cells, you have, let's say you have a standard range plus Tesla Model 3, you have about 2,200 size lithium-ion cells, and these are put into 4 longitudinal models that each contain a group or a brick, which means that you'll have about 3,000 cells in 96 groups of 31. So that's a lot of small, those batteries that look like AA batteries. There's a lot of that in lithium-ion batteries for Tesla Model 3. But now if you look at chemistry, I don't know if you know this, but recently Tesla has changed the battery chemistries of the Tesla Model 3 Standard Range Plus, going from lithium ion nickel cobalt to lithium iron phosphate.
Yeah.
Because they're cheaper, they're more stable, but they are less energy dense than regular lithium ion batteries. So for all sorts of reasons, but one of them being the fact that the minerals that you put into a lithium ion battery, a lithium iron phosphate battery, are not as rare and are cheaper. It is a good argument for some manufacturers to switch towards that type of battery. And other than that, we're coming out with solid state batteries in the years to come. And actually, Toyota is one of the players in that field.
Okay, thanks. I mean, it's really.
And on the second question you want to ask me,
okay,
is it easy to move them around? I mean, actually, right now, if you look at battery plants around the world, more than 90% of battery plants, of big battery plants, are located either in China, Japan, or Korea. So that means that most batteries come from Asia. And now the US government sees that and understands that. But this is something that should have been part of the discussion 15, 20 years ago, but they just woke up to that fact. And the European government is waking up to that fact as well, saying that we don't want to end up having the same problem of a battery supply that we've seen with oil supply in the past, for instance, because it could create geopolitical incertitude.
Okay, thank you very much. Scott, so Daniel explained the minutiae of what goes into a battery, but batteries are huge. Once all those 3,000 cylindrical battery cells are put into one enclosure, and then you have all the management hardware as well, they're pretty large. Can batteries be assembled anywhere and then shipped to assembly plants, or are they best built near an assembly plant? As one of the largest legacy automakers in Canada, why don't you walk us through some of the issues that constrain how, where, and why we might build future factories in Canada?
Thanks, David. And, Danielle's right that, currently most of the batteries used in production are coming from other places, whether it be Asia or otherwise. Apart from Tesla, battery electric vehicles, in terms of proportion of sales overall in the market are still relatively low, although they are climbing. When you're in low volume, shipping batteries over long distance is a little bit more manageable, but as the uptake increases, and you start building a higher proportion of your vehicles being electrified, the scale is going to change everything. And at that point, you're going to want to have that battery supply as close to you as possible because, when you're building to scale, like in the case of Toyota's operations in Canada, We make around 500,000 vehicles a year. If they were all fully electrified, whether it be battery electric vehicle or plug-in hybrid or hybrid, they would each need a battery, and shipping that amount of batteries, across the world would be prohibitively expensive, and you're going to want something a lot closer to.
Thanks very much, Scott. And I think it's very important that our viewers understand that that the constraints that are different for a battery cell that Daniel explained, and of course the entire battery that Scott explained.
Sorry, David.
Yep.
And just build on that. You mentioned that batteries are big, and they are, especially a full-size battery electric vehicle, but they're also incredibly heavy. A full-size battery, you're looking at something that weighs in the order of 1,000 pounds. And, shipping those through traditional methods, and for us in just-in-time manufacturing, we're using trucks, and, shipping batteries via truck is pretty challenging because you're actually going to weigh out a truck before you would cube it out. In which case, it's, again, building the case that you're going to want them as close to you as possible.
Thanks very much. Flavio, the Auto Parts Manufacturers Association of Canada is on the cutting edge of the efforts to get manufacturers to build batteries and other EV components in Canada. What is Canada's best foot forward in attracting this new kind of assembly plant? What, if any, battery manufacturing plants are already planned for Canada? Do these plants need completely new facilities, or can existing facilities be converted? And lastly, what is APMA currently doing to attract these new facilities and these new manufacturers?
So there's a lot of questions in that one question, David, but let me just...
Yeah, sorry.
Just unpack a little bit here. This is early days in battery manufacturing around the world, and Scott alluded to the fact that we're really talking about right now less than 5% of current sales. So less than 5% of the market currently drawing from companies that are already in the business, an LG, an SSK, or companies like BYD that are Chinese companies that have been in and out of Canada, southwestern Ontario for 12, 15 years now, or companies like Total doing a joint venture with a major automaker like Stellantis and saying, look, on ACC, where could we and should we go? There are no charities in this business. They all report quarterly, publicly traded. No one's going to build up a factory on spec. So one of the things that's very important for them is to match up with companies, you call them legacy automakers. The legacy automakers and the new automakers, although I will say Toyota's a kind of funny one in the middle, because I think we're all talking about this because somebody decided to launch a Prius about 25 years ago. And what can we predict is the vehicles they're going to make, where they're going to make them, where do they currently make them, what are they going to replace, and what are the motivators, the incentives in those markets to be able to predict how many batteries we need. And then based on that, how much market share can you get? So, we're very excited to be talking to companies like Stromvolt or British Volt, new ventures, great technology, looking at what they think is, look, if the battery market is going to grow by 50-fold, 2 million battery electric vehicles a year to 100 million in the mid 2030s, at the highest end of that prediction, then where can we grab market share? Who do we need to do it with? About 10, 12 years ago, the German manufacturers had gotten together on diesel, and they shared a technology, a bunch of them, Blue Tech diesel. You see a bunch of different brands carry them around. What they said was, there isn't enough to support for one company's, there isn't enough orders from one company to support a model, but we can share it. I think we're going to see some of that in automotive, in batteries. Outliers to that, of course, General Motors has gone all in on their Altium brand, and a lot of them are saying we're going to go with our own chemistries. That's the recipe. That's where the milk gets in the coconut. But the reality is, if the curve looks more like this, then they're going to have to share in this space. If the curve looks like this, then you're going to see some partnerships come out of that. We've got we launched Project Aero, which is a all-Canadian designed, engineered, and built concept vehicle that is meant to highlight that we can do all of this in Canada. And one of the discoveries we had in this is about 150 companies I didn't even know existed in this country in that value chain. And we represent 300, so you can imagine I didn't think the gap was that big. But there's a whole bunch of companies that jumped out in the battery space that were very interesting to me, and a couple of them. One of them does a little bit of business with Toyota, is Electrovaya in Mississauga. We've known Electrovaya for a while, but what's important with them is their manufacturing footprint is zero carbon. So never mind their prismatic cells and the energy density and the things that are important to a customer. When we talk about corporate responsibility, companies like that might become a little bit more attractive to companies like Scott's. Hey, by the way, we're not giving you a really clean battery, and by the way, burning coal to process it. And then a company like Summit Nanotech out of Alberta that is still in that kind of a proof of concept stage on the battery, but really interesting, taking the brine water from oil and gas and extracting lithium. Well, if you could do that predictably, both in terms of the quality of the lithium and the quantity, there you start to understand that there could be a national buy-in industrially on our battery future.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. It's interesting that even Alberta can get in on the deal, at least a little bit. I'm not sure they're going to have much more. In fact, that's what I'm going to ask Joanna next. We've covered a bunch of stuff on manufacturing, Joanna, and Scott brought forward some important logistical issues about the transportation of large batteries. So where does this leave the prospect of battery plants to be located in the future? Is the field wide open? Do Quebec and Ontario have the edge? Is it Quebec's clean energy that's the bigger advantage, or is it Ontario's base of auto manufacturing? In terms of the actual battery assembly, do any of the non-traditional provinces like out west that don't have any auto manufacturing right now, do they have a hope in this? And are automakers already talking to the various resource companies looking to source materials that they'll need to build batteries in the future?
The vast majority of battery demand over the next decade is going to come from passenger vehicles. As Scott alluded to, we are expecting to see battery plants being set up as close to vehicle assembly plants as possible, which makes Ontario an obvious choice for where we may see future battery plants in Canada. But Quebec is a competitor here. That province has done a lot to proactively build out its battery industry. It's also home to electric bus and truck manufacturers like Nova Bus and Lion Electric, as well as an electric snowmobile manufacturer, Integra Motors. So there's a market there too. And then Quebec, of course, has clean and very cheap electricity, which has been a huge draw. Those advantages have attracted Stromvolt and British Volt, who both announced that they plan to set up shop in Quebec. For these reasons, I certainly see Central Canada as being the center of gravity for Canada's battery industry. But as Flavio started to allude to, I think that other provinces have an opportunity to feed into the value chain as well. So BC is already home to some companies that lead on marine vehicle batteries. Corvus Energy produces battery technology that goes into electric ferries. Summit Nanotech and another Albertan company, E3 Metals, is doing that extraction of lithium from oil field wastewater brines. And then in Atlantic Canada, Nova Scotia's Dalhousie University is home to one of the world's top battery researchers, and his team is working with Tesla on various R&D projects. So while I do think that we're going to see a lot of activity in Quebec and Ontario, this really is a pan-Canadian opportunity when it comes to building out our battery value chain.
Thanks very much. Even Nova Scotia, huh? Well, maybe we're better off than many people think to be a part of this. Man, Nova Scotia. Okay, Scott. Toyota is, of course, the biggest automaker in the world, and more importantly, it's one of the manufacturing powerhouses here in Canada. So who better to ask about all the consideration a manufacturer will have to make to take into account before it builds a battery or even an electric vehicle assembly plant in Canada? I'm not looking for any state secrets here, Scott. I know I'm not going to get them. But can you walk us through what the considerations are for a large company like Toyota? How large does Canada's EV segment have to grow before we get an EV assembly plant? How large does the segment have to grow before we might get a battery assembly plant from Toyota, or not Toyota, but anything? Just walk us through the general considerations, okay, Scott?
Sure. Canada is obviously a very important market for Toyota. It's one of, it's certainly in the top 10 in terms of markets globally that we have, but it's important to remember that about 85% of our production in Canada goes into the US. Our operations in Ontario, we produce cars for Canada, but again, the lion's share go into the US. So it's really the North American market that's going to drive this, and it's going to be overall product demand. So product demand. So, battery electric vehicles, we announced BZ4X is going to be coming out this coming year. We'll have other fully electric offerings coming into the market soon. It's the demand for those individual models that will really necessitate local battery production. And, being able to get a critical threshold, typically we look at around 50,000 units of production in order to justify localizing something. And I think you're going to need that mass at an individual model level in order to justify, local batteries.
In other words, what you're saying is like a popular brand like a RAV4, something that is one singular model that will take one set of batteries, will have to have a large volume before you can move production locally.
Yeah, exactly. So, for instance, if we were ever to have a fully electric RAV4 again, because actually we've done it twice in the past, but if we were going to bring that to market again, you'd probably have a mix of different powertrains, at least initially, where you'd still be making hybrid vehicles, but also plug-in hybrids and battery electric vehicles. And that's actually a good place to be because you can manage market fluctuation a little bit better if you're making all three of them. But for a particular product, for instance, a fully electric RAV4, just as an example, you would still need that critical mass for that specific powertrain in order to justify local production of batteries.
Thanks very much. Flavio, I think I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit. Stellantis has announced that they have a huge battery plant planned for North America. And I know that as early as the beginning of this year, the Windsor Essex folks, where Stellantis has a huge base of manufacturing, have been putting an enormous effort into getting a battery plant in its locality. Can you give us any hint to what's happening here? Have we got any chance to land such a big whale? I know smaller plants are coming, but that would be a huge one. Any updates? Anything you could tell us at all?
Well, I think the hints are in what you said and what Scott said. And so the biggest draw is that Stellantis committed to an electric platform in the Windsor assembly plant, which is a great story. It's on the border. It's been operating since the 1920s, and it's converting to full electric. And so kind of what Scott's talking about is these decisions get their proposition from what's the volume of a single vehicle needing those batteries. And so, Steve McKenzie's doing a great job down at the Windsor Essex Development Commission. And I know he talked publicly about having a few big fish on the hook. I'll say this. I've seen the hook, and I've seen who's been on it, and there's no bluffing there. It is for us Stellantis, and I'm not talking on their behalf, but for us Stellantis, the Windsor-Detroit area is very important from a production volume point of view. And so being able to do something in that area would also have an eye to supplying other lines on the other side of the river. I like to always say that, we got a better proposition on the Canadian side, especially when we talk about some of the things that Joanna talked about, which is make the cells in Quebec. Great energy mix there, great energy pricing and great resource mix. Send them to Ontario to get packed into batteries that Daniel described, and then use Ontario as a base to serve the Midwest. It is not out of the question that what you're talking about comes to fruition, but I'll tell you, it's sitting on my notes here. Probably name 2 or 3 opportunities that are very mature at this point. That we could miss them all, but we're certainly in the game on all of them.
So that's as hopeful a message as I've heard, Flavio. I really appreciate it because, there's some negativity about it. But so we're at least certainly in the mix on the Stellantis one, I think is what you're saying.
Well, I think I'm not saying anything out of school here. I think we heard Carlos Tavares say, I'm looking at 2 plants in North America and Canada could be one of them. And so you're hearing it from Paris on the record from the guy that matters the most. Then take it at face value.
Well, if we don't get anything else out of this whole panel, just that positive message is already worthwhile. Thanks very much. Joanna, the elephant in the room is the American government wish to apply Buy American rules, namely that the subsidies for EVs will only be available to electric vehicles built in America, and that part of the incentive is even only available to EVs built in America by union employees. What's this going to do for Canada's prospects for new manufacturing of EVs and battery plants? What can we do about it? Most importantly, is our federal government doing enough to either get this taken off the table or get a Canadian manufacturing exemption? Or what is the latest data on this Buy American plan for electric vehicles?
So happy to start us off, and then I think some others may have something to say as well. So yes, certainly the EV tax credit that was just passed by the House in the U.S. is on a lot of people's minds. It does pose risks to Canada's EV and battery manufacturing prospects, because if there are companies who are on the fence between Canada and the US, this could cause them to choose the US in terms of where they'd like to set up shop so that they can benefit from the full tax credit. Now, I think I also want to just raise, on the flip side, out of the about 87 EVs that are expected to be available in the US at the end of 2022, only 4 would likely qualify for this full tax credit. So it's hard to know. It's hard to know truly how big of a deal this is, and I guess that just means there are other investments and other opportunities that Canada could still capture. There are a lot of automakers who are being left out of these tax credits. In terms of what we can do about it, so I think the best thing Canada can do is to continue to remind the US of our long history of collaboration on autos, our deeply integrated supply chains, which have benefited both countries and have helped the North American auto market or auto sector compete globally. Disrupting those supply chains is going to have negative impacts on U.S. companies and workers as well, like the auto parts suppliers that supply Canadian assembly plants. And I think it could also potentially raise the cost of EVs for consumers, including American consumers. I think we should be reminding the U.S. of Canada's mineral resource strengths. It's one of the few things that we've got and they need. And then, and just to say, if we're going to be collaborating on that part of the supply chain, the critical minerals part, then we should be collaborating downstream too. And then finally, I think it was good for Canada to threaten to bring a claim under the USMCA agreement, because this measure probably violates trade law, and so that was sort of good as a more aggressive move on Canada's part. I personally don't think we should engage in a tit for tat trade war with the US on this measure, because our market is a fraction of the size of theirs, and I don't think we would win. So last, in terms of if the government has done enough, I think that the feds, they did get on this issue. It rose to the top of the agenda in the recent Three Amigos summit with the U.S. and Mexico. So I think they got there, and the question is just, did they get there too late in the game for it to actually impact any of the decision making south of the border?
Flavio, have you got anything more to add from the parts manufacturing side of things?
Scott's smiling because I've spent the last week in Washington and the last 2 months on this. Joanna's right when we take the look on today. How many vehicles are affected? What's the size of the market? Scott's talked about how small the market is currently right now, and so the American defense of this discriminatory action is, well, it's a small part of the market and it's really early, and we're just also want to get good union jobs. But the reality is that the proposed legislation and the regulations say that in 2027,
exactly,
the entire $12,500 quantum will be used only to apply to cars made in the United States. That, for the Canadian automotive proposition, is a death knell. If you have a vehicle that costs $37,000, and Donald Trump threatened to raise the price of the Canadian vehicles by 25%. Certainly, you can see where the buyer is going to go. But what Joe Biden is saying is, well, let's drop it 33%. And we think this is worse than anything that was threatened by a crazy president who yelled at the moon. This is a rational actor using a congressional instrument to do something specific to us, looking at us straight in the eyes. So there will be a USMCA challenge if it passes, and that's an if. It's got to go to a Senate vote. There'll be a WTO challenge quicker than a USMCA challenge, and I think one of the things that the feds, I know, are doing, I'll be back in Washington talking to 5 senators in 2 weeks. They are talking to our trading partners who are also probably more injured than us in the grand scheme of things. Japan's investment in production, Japanese companies' investment in production in the U.S. is as big as American companies' production in the U.S., and it's growing rather than shrinking. And there are non-union shops who pay more than the union shops, and they're the biggest importers of new technology into the American market. And so Japan will be there on a WTO challenge. This is going to get really, really messy, really, really quick if it passes in the Senate. And then the question will be, will it pass in the Senate? And unlike the Canadian system, the Americans decide when they're going to bring a vote. They decide to bring a vote when leadership thinks they can win that vote. And that could be next week, could be February. It could be never if you listen to the senator from West Virginia who's got a Toyota powertrain plant in his backyard. He's not looking after Canada's interests, but he may have, from his own West Virginian interest, an interest in stopping this thing. We definitely need to stop it. End of story. There is no Canadian auto sector if it doesn't have access to the U.S. market, period.
Can I jump in?
Yes, please.
So I would like to remind your viewers that on February 24th, 2021, President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau signed the roadmap for a new U.S.-Canada partnership. And I think this is very important because they wrote, and I quote, "The leaders agreed to work together to build the necessary supply chain to make Canada and the United States global leaders in all aspects of battery development and production. To that end, the leaders agreed to strengthen the Canada-U.S. Critical Mineral Action Plan to target a net zero industrial transformation, batteries for zero-emission vehicles, and renewable energy storage." So that was signed in February. Here we are in November discussing the fact that because of this Build Back Better plan, Canada EV supply chain could be really hurt by what's happening south of the border. So if they really want to be partner and follow up on this renewed U.S.-Canada partnership, it doesn't make sense. It's a total contradiction. But we have the minerals that they don't have. So I think it's a bargaining power for us that we should use. I think we would be the laughing stock if we did not use that as a bargaining chip regarding U.S.-Canada partnership. And what I'm seeing right now in the U.S., last week, Prime Minister Trudeau was in Washington to discuss many topics, but one very important topic was EV development, EV supply chain. And let's not forget here that what we are seeing from a geopolitical international point of view right now is China that's being very bullish on battery development. They control a lot of the supply chain and most of the refining of lithium, for instance. And I don't know if you remember this or you heard about this, but about a month and a half ago, there was a Canadian lithium company that was bought by a by a Chinese company. And I can tell you that in Washington, that was looked at and they were not very happy, because what the US government is saying is, for geopolitical reasons, we want to make sure that if we work in partnership with Canadians and the Canadian government for US and Canadian national security strategy, we have to make sure that we don't send all our critical minerals outside of Canada and the US. And right now, 99% of lithium that's being extracted in Canada goes directly to China. So it's a complicated issue, but we want to work together. We have to tell the US we have critical minerals, but for strategic and national security considerations, we have to make sure that we can supply our EV batteries and our supply chain for Canadians before sending it directly overseas.
So I think what you're saying is we have some bargaining chips. We can almost hold the Americans hostage, that if they even want to build their plants in the States, we have the lithium they need, and currently we're selling it to their biggest competitors.
Something like that. It's a bit more complicated than that, but I mean, broadly, it's a bit like that.
Well, Scott, does this affect what you already do with hybrids in Canada now? Could this be something that affects the future? How does this affect somebody who's actually selling cars right this moment?
Just building on the comments that were already made, Joanna was right that it's a relatively small problem in the near term. Further out, it becomes a massive. Our government in Canada has banned, the sale of internal combustion engines, or at least internal combustion only engines by 2035. So, what exactly are we going to make in the future? Hybrids are exempted from this ZEV policy in the US, so we could keep on making those. Internal combustion engines are exempted from that policy. We could keep on making those, but none of those are desirable in Canada by 2035. So who are our customers going to be? And, even though this is a small scale problem in the near future, the bigger problem is around, attracting investments. And, this situation creates a lot of uncertainty, specifically for, our headquarters in Japan, in terms of where they're going to place assets. And I think we need to get that uncertainty off of the table immediately, or at least as soon as possible.
Certainly, I've got to believe, as you say, that somebody in Japan making large decisions on where to place their future battery plants is looking at this, and until this is resolved, they certainly can't commit to our country, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I don't think we're at the point where that's driving decision making today. But the longer this extends, out into next year, as an example, those decisions in terms of where battery plants are going to be placed are going to be coming a lot closer and a lot sooner and a lot quicker. And, having that uncertainty hovering over you is not really helpful. So, I'll reiterate, the sooner we can get this resolved, the better. Danielle talked about using critical minerals as a wedge, and Joanna also talked about, us being a smaller market in the US and not having a lot of power. But we've been in this situation before with 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum, and we collaborated with the international community. Like Flavio said, you've got Japan, you've got the EU, you've got South Korea, you've got a lot of large economies out there that are impacted, to the same extent that we are in Canada, and that, they've invested in plants in the US, and their products are basically not welcome under this scenario. So I think if the international community actually, bands together and has some targeted actions, on the U.S. administration, I think that's probably your most successful outcome, assuming, as Flavio said, assuming it does actually make it through the Senate. And I don't think that's a certainty at this point.
Well, okay. Well, you know what? I've done about 6 or 7 of these panels, and I don't think I've ever seen a more universal response to any question or topic I've ever had to that. So I think we can all chalk that up as bad. I'm going to switch gears, guys. Daniel, so far we've talked only about using Canada's resources as a way to leverage our way into battery manufacturing. But with all these batteries in the world, how do they get recycled at the end of their life cycle? The IEEE estimates that just the new car sold last year had 134.5 gigawatt hours of batteries in them. That's a lot of batteries. And we're just at the beginning of this switch to electrification. The biggest battery manufacturer in the world, China's CATL, is already recycling its batteries. In fact, I think they're talking about being able to do enough for 200,000 automotive batteries. Is this a lucrative business, and does Canada get in on this?
It will be a lucrative business. For now, it's not really, because the batteries actually last longer than was first expected. So it's not an issue for now. And one perfect example of that is that I remember back in 2006, I don't know if you remember this, Scott, but I was in the university and I was studying the life cycle impact of the Hummer H2 and versus the Toyota Prius, because they said that the Prius would be more impactful to the environment because it wouldn't last as long. And now what we're seeing, whether it's in San Francisco, Toronto, Montreal, or New York, that many cab drivers are actually driving Priuses and Prius Vs because they do last very long. So the issue of battery recycling, it's interesting these days. The government of Quebec is working on a regulation proposal where they took for granted that an electric vehicle battery is supposed to last approximately 10 years. And after that, they should be recycled. And I would say that there was consensus amongst environmental groups and experts and OEMs saying the regulation proposal from the government of Quebec doesn't stand a chance to work, because batteries are built to last a lot longer than that before they send them to recycling. But before going to recycling, actually, there's the reuse part, meaning that the batteries can be reused for a second life, whether it's for energy storage or second use into another vehicle. And as batteries last longer and longer with time, because now we're talking about batteries that will eventually last between 1.6 and 3.5 million kilometers. So if you're talking about 1.6 million kilometers, you drive 20,000 kilometers a year, that's 80 years. So that means that the batteries are going to have to be switched from one car to the other at one point, meaning that the recycling of the batteries is something that's going to be further along the way. For batteries for buses, which it's a very different story, because it's very intensive, meaning that the batteries don't last as long, but they get rebuilt right now. It's happening everywhere in the world, because let's not forget that while we're very happy to have about 100 electric buses in Canada, there's more than 600,000 in China right now. So they are way ahead of us. But there are 2 Canadian companies working on recycling batteries. One of them is Li-Cycle in Ontario. The other one is Lithium in Quebec. And both of them are working on technology to make them not only 95% recyclable, but very, very, the business model works very well. So that's what we're going to be calling urban mining, meaning that instead of going to extract the minerals north of Ontario or Quebec or Alberta, will actually reuse the minerals to put into another battery. And to me, that's a very important part of the puzzle.
Hopefully it can grow. Flavio, we've been talking all around all the various businesses that can be part of, the EV revolution. I read a report recently that a European-wide battery supply chain, and that's including everything from resources and battery manufacturing to the battery recycling that we just talked about, could be worth as much as $400 billion a year and create 4 million new jobs. Now, our car market and our industry is nothing nearly as large as the EU's, but have we actually projected out any figures on what's at stake here in terms of getting onto this battery gravy train?
Yes and no. The Europeans, of course, are further up the chain. Obviously, in transportation in general, the Europeans have been leaders in reducing carbon footprints as a target, a regional target, etc. Way ahead of what essentially happens in North America, which is the California Air Resources Board says, you want to do this. The EPA in DC says, we're going to fight you. Then we end up doing what California wanted to do. And then Canada harmonizes with the Americans.
Depending on the president.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's a whole other show. The European, that opportunity in Europe, that $400 billion, what that really comes down to is essentially assuming that at some point the entire European output of vehicles is battery driven, and then taking the full value of those vehicles and then saying that's what the opportunity is. I mean, it may actually be true. But within that, what's the potential value chain for Canada in the battery supply chain? First of all, the European market, especially Western European market, is essentially the same as the North American market in terms of production and sales. So, we're looking at the similar quantums. Canada, and specifically Quebec, I should say, have an opportunity to be one of, if not the most important node within North America for battery production. Now, there are lots of different ways this can go. Like the 2024 Toronto Blue Jays could be the best team in the league. They've got all the pieces, got all the talent. Everybody's young. The right coach, and they'll win. And we should look back. We can look back on 2024. I think that's where they can go. But
I'm sorry, Flavio, but when I look at the Canadians in the last series and now, it's night and day.
yeah, exactly. So for Canada, we've got all the assets. But it's a conversation I constantly have with the feds and the two provincial governments to say, look, we got everything we need in the ground. And we've got 2 million vehicles we make a year here. So as a kind of an anchor for an order, who's going to process it? And mining companies aren't going to process it on spec. That's a completely different discipline. And automotive suppliers or manufacturers aren't going to process the critical minerals and turn them into cells and sell them to themselves. And they're also not going to be the ones that build the charging infrastructure. And so there is a whole of government and whole of society approach here that is where the milk gets in the coconut. If we don't do it, then Quebec isn't going to be a major player. We will, in spite of everything that we're all talking about here, we will scoop the dirt, put it in trains, and send it over to our U.S. buyers, the same way that, mining companies will sell their assets to a Chinese buyer. In the end, nobody is a charity. I had a discussion with a federal minister whom I shall not name, but who was very interested in this process and said, well, who are the processors? And I said, well, if you think about Quebec and aluminum, all the aluminum companies that you think are aluminum companies, they're processors. They take the raw materials, they turn it into a usable stock for customers that are Scott, his company, and the companies I represent that turn them into aluminum things. So we can do what the Europeans are talking about. First of all, the Europeans may fail as well, but they're much more advanced in their coordination, transnational and international coordination. And I think they have a better understanding of what's at stake than North America does as a whole. And they're also, yes, they may be driven, for example, by Germany, but really, really big players in France and Italy, and still influenced by the UK. And here it's Sacramento and Washington, and then we're playing picking to see who's going to win. We may not. I say this to people all the time. This may just be an academic course subject 20 years from now. We say we could have done this, but we didn't do it. And Quebec is the biggest exporter of raw materials into the EV space, into Nevada, or into Michigan, or into Tennessee. And the difference will be the type of jobs that we have and the type of future that our children and their children will have. If we can figure out the battery processing, cell manufacturing, cluster node strategy, if we can figure out how to create our own market, to advance our own market on the technologies for charging and supporting of these, then we can make the kind of value propositions to the Toyotas and the Stellantis of the world and say, you do it here, there's that 401 corridor, do it here, and we'll win. I could flip a coin on whether we'll make it there. But certainly if we're not admitting that we may lose and understanding just how competitive Tennessee, of all places, landed a $10 billion Ford investment. If you'd asked us 2 months ago, who's on the list, nobody would have said it. And so we can lose this, and we may lose this. But we can also end up right on top like the 2024 Toronto Blue Jays, Daniel.
How do I follow up that with a rational question? I mean, seriously, thanks very much. Okay, Joanna, I'm going to move on to a question from a reader who wonders a little bit about the sources of cobalt. There's been some news in the world and in the newspapers and everything else about cobalt coming from the Congo. And there's much less. I think it's something like 2/3 of all the cobalt comes from Congo. And the headlines have been saying about how it's less than ideal working conditions. Are there alternatives to cobalt? Does Canada have any cobalt resources? What is there anything that, for people that are concerned, and we should all be concerned about these news? Is there something we can do about Canada contribute to build batteries in a safer and equitable way?
Canada is home to cobalt, and so we do have that resource, and our mining sector does have a better track record than the Congo when it comes to, and also, globally, we have a relatively strong track record on environmental and socially responsible standards when it comes to mining. First Cobalt in Ontario recently received, I think, $5 to $10 million from in government support to work on a cobalt refinery that would be feeding in battery-grade cobalt into the battery supply chain. I think it's still a little while before that actually comes online. But just to echo what Flavio said, I too believe that the processing and midstream portions of the supply chain are a really big opportunity that for Canada that's not getting enough attention right now. Everyone's focused on the battery cell manufacturing plants. So yes, Canada can help out when it comes to feeding more cobalt into the global battery supply chain. And then Danielle mentioned earlier that if you look at trends in battery chemistry, there's a real move away from cobalt, to reduce reliance on parts of the world like the Congo, and to replace that cobalt, there's a move towards nickel, which Canada also has large reserves of, as well as other chemistries like iron phosphate. I think there's a number of companies in the US who are trying to move towards that iron phosphate because the metals and minerals are more abundant and less expensive. So I do think we're going to be seeing some alternatives to cobalt, and certainly there is a lot of scrutiny on the environmental and social and governance standards related to mining of these materials.
Can I say something here about this?
Please.
This is important because actually, I would say that more than 90% of the cobalt that's being mined in Congo right now is not being mined by private citizens, whether it's children or adults. It's being mined by big companies using big trucks. So that's a lot of fake news. But I think that there's something important that we need to say as well. Is the LFP battery, lithium ion battery. was developed in Canada. And that's something where we can get more and more interest on developing lithium ion batteries. So there's a real opportunity here for Canada research and development, whether it's from Nova Scotia, from Quebec, or from Ontario. But we have great researchers in Canada developing new technology, solid state batteries, batteries of the future. So when Joanna, I totally agree with Joanna. We're looking at new chemistries here in the years to come that will make the battery not only more reliable, but also safer, and they will last longer and a lot less time to charge as well.
Okay, I got some more reader questions. They're all very good, and I don't go get through them, but I want to go with one of the most offbeat ones, and we'll see what comes out of this. Flavio, somebody named Dave asks, is quantum computing part of the breakthrough analysis for battery development? I am chair of the York University Quantum Computing for Social Impact and would like to contribute. I mean, does our abilities in Canada to in computing and high tech aid in any of this development and furthering this industry?
Great question. And then, Dave, you should know that we spent the supply sector spent a lot of time hanging around the Perimeter Institute, and it's related institutes to get a better understanding from theoretical physicists on how we move from electrifying to what are the possibilities with high voltage platforms on managing transportation into a no collision environment. And then also, you know, we're all fighting this cost matrix of, okay, what's the best mineral mix for energy density and at the most profitable levels? And the usual plan of attack is to go at it from a pure chemistry point of view, and then see what the market can bear. A quantum approach is kind of an advanced level approach that says, look, can we do things in battery thermal management, in the power electronics? It's the connection of the vehicle to the home or office, the way that we manage them to stretch the range of vehicles. And then in stretching the range of vehicles, for example, there's a great German company that we work with that is using solar cells on the roof of a vehicle to extend the range by 9 to 11%. And it's one of those things where, look, how are we going to make these batteries work better in the package that we deliver so that we can actually give people an option? So absolutely, Dave, you and your friends and your colleagues are required for a fresh look here, because we're not going to win this on chemistry, because we may get the 1,000,000-mile battery and it may cost $1 million. What we want is the 1,000-mile battery for $1,000. And that's not just going to be in the way that we pack physical items in a chemistry mix. It's going to be in the way in which we manage its use inside and outside of that vehicle.
A complicated answer for a complicated question, I think. Daniel, I'm going to you for one last question, and you're going to have to be short, okay? Because we got about 2 minutes left. I'm getting a number of questions, and they aren't about battery manufacturing, but they're about batteries in the cold. We know about that here. Basically asking, do batteries last less time in Canada because we have cold weather? And other questions about, is there anything coming down the pipeline that gets us adequate range at the minus 30 degrees that we see here in Canada? And you got about a minute. Oh.
Actually, batteries last longer in cold weather. So if you live in the desert or in Nevada, there's a chance that the battery won't last as long. Are we looking on working to make sure that batteries have better range in cold weather? Well, there's battery warmers now being installed by some manufacturers, or heat pumps, which help making sure that the batteries will have more range. But from one manufacturer to the other, it's very different. I did the test in the middle of a snowstorm at minus 25 2 years ago in the winter with 7 different electric vehicles. And the loss of range went from 20% for the best vehicle to 50% loss for the worst vehicle. So it's not all equal from one manufacturer to the other. Some of them are better than others.
Well, I'm guessing that sooner or later somebody would like to know a report from you on which manufacturers those are. I've got to sign off now, guys. I think the conclusion we can make is that Canada has a real chance at being part of the battery revolution and the electric vehicle revolution. The biggest roadblocks would seem to be a lack of urgency, perhaps from some of our government officials, and also this regulations in the United States. On the other hand, it sounds like we have the expertise, we have the wherewithal, we have the conditions, and we have the industries to excel in this. And really, that's great news. I mean, one of the most positive panels I've ever held. So I want to thank you all very, very much for joining us. Extremely informative. Flavio, Joanna, Daniel, Scott, thanks all for your input. It was absolutely fantastic.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Having us.